Conor McGregor wasn't supposed to come back. He was supposed to be done fighting competitively anyway. After the bout with Floyd Mayweather, where he reportedly earned over $100 million while also starting his successful whiskey brand Proper 12, the motivation to fight for money was lost. That same motivation that got him into the game and made him the fighter and character so many people fell in love with. You know, the quote-unquote hungry McGregor. The guy who made his UFC debut while collecting welfare and had to rock a handed-down family suit to his first press conference. But with that motivation to earn money through his fighting and be able to provide for his family, he rose quickly on the MMA scene and managed to win 2 belts at his previous promotion Cage Warriors, which caught the attention of the UFC, where of course the big money can be earned. And as he has stated many times, he wanted to get in, get rich and get out. And with the opportunity to fight in the UFC along with his hunger to make it on the biggest stage, he quickly climbed in the UFC rankings by knocking out or TKOing every single opponent he faced except Max Holloway, who he defeated comfortably in a decision after tearing his ACL in the middle of the second round. And the vision was clear: repeat what he did in Cage Warriors to become the champion in both featherweight and lightweight and hold the belts simultaneously, something that had never been done in the UFC before. And this is something that kind of separates Conor from most fighters, the vision of accomplishing something that has never been done before, putting the bar higher and setting new records. The vision of creating history long before he actually has a chance to do it. And I will get back to this later in this video. But with his quick rise, mostly due to his spectacular and effective fighting style, the first task of getting a shot at the 145 pounds featherweight title would arise quicker than anyone had anticipated. And with only 5 fights in the UFC, he was scheduled to fight the undefeated featherweight champion of 10 years, Jose Aldo, for the belt. And with all the press conferences completed and only 11 days to make the walk into the octagon, Aldo pulls out of the fight with a rib injury and the chance to claim the undisputed title is gone. However, this was something that Conor had anticipated, and when the UFC broke the news to him in the middle of his nap and told him he now had to fight Chad Mendes, he wasn't surprised. Instead, he rather famously responded by opening one eye, stating they are all the same, and then went back to sleep. However, Conor goes from slight favorite to win the fight to becoming the underdog after the change of opponent, as Mendes' style of fighting is different from Aldo's. And Conor has his own problems to deal with, as he has tore his ACL in the build-up to the fight, something his team has kept secret to not give away any weaknesses to the opponent. But pulling out of the fight was never an option and is something he has never done in his career so far, and he has stated that injuries are just part of the fight business and something that you cannot avoid, but you can work around it, or to quote him directly, I improvise, adapt and overcome. And in the fight against Mendes, he did just that after securing yet another TKO in the second round, and some rare emotions were shown after the fight which gave a glimpse of how much he had to overcome in order to win that fight and secure an interim featherweight belt. And now the fight with Jose Aldo to become the undisputed champion at featherweight was inevitable, and the only thing standing between them was time. Now both fighters were able to rehabilitate their injuries and get into shape, and it wouldn't take long before the fight was scheduled for the second time. 6 months after the Mendes fight, Conor has a chance to turn one part of his vision into reality, as both of them make the walk into the octagon and the cage closes. And I'm pretty sure you all know what happened in this fight, as it's now an all-time classic and one of the most spectacular performances ever.
Anticipated featherweight fight of all time. Here we go! Green trunks for the southpaw, the notorious Conor McGregor. Black trunks for the champion, Jose Aldo Jr.
Conor relaxed and smiling.
Oh no! Just like that! Conor McGregor is the new UFC featherweight champion of the world!
Oh, unbelievable!
10 seconds in, and in the very first exchange, Conor clips him with his left, tips the chin and puts him to sleep. After a few hammer fists across the face to an unconscious Aldo, the ref stops the fight and it's all over. The fight lasted for 13 seconds in total, and Conor McGregor is now the undisputed featherweight champion, and he is now recognized as a star, not only in MMA but in the world. The few people who still doubted him before the fight stayed quiet and acknowledged that he was the real deal. At the post-fight press conference, he once again made his vision clear for everyone, to replicate what he did in Cage Warriors and become the title holder in 2 divisions, which was his plan all along. And once again, it wouldn't take long for him to get the opportunity to create history and now completely turn his vision into reality. Only 3 months after the record-breaking fight against Aldo, he was scheduled to fight Rafael dos Anjos, who was the current 155 pounds lightweight title holder. The fight was announced, press conferences were held, and the world got ready for another historic moment. But history has a tendency to repeat itself, and as his fellow Brazilian countryman, dos Anjos also pulls out of the fight due to a foot injury, and the lightweight title is no longer on the line. However, the UFC is desperate to keep McGregor on the card as he is the main event, and they start to scramble for a replacement to dos Anjos. There's a shortage of possible opponents to face McGregor with only 11 days to fight, but Nate Diaz has previously been vocal about fighting him and also pretty aggressively called him out during his previous post-fight interview, stating that McGregor is a motherfucker who has taken everything he has worked for. The only problem is that there's not enough time to safely cut the weight for him, and negotiations of a catch weight begins. Reportedly, a fight at 160 pounds was suggested. However, Diaz wanted it at 165, ensuring him to make the weight on such short notice, and Conor reportedly responded by saying, "Let's just make it at 170, you can be comfortable, Nate." And although Conor didn't have enough time to reach the weight of 170, weighing in at only 168, he claimed that weight should never be an issue for a true mixed martial arts champion. However, looking back at this, it might have been a mistake, as this is where his first loss in the UFC would take place.
1 minute on the clock. Diaz gets the move. My goodness. Now he's got the back.
No! That's it! He's got the check!
Nate Diaz.
He's done it!
It is all over. Nate Diaz beats Conor McGregor.
Oh my goodness!
Diaz managed to withstand the early onslaught from McGregor, who caught him with some heavy shots, but Diaz came out victorious despite being the underdog. The doubters quickly came back and made their voices heard, and Conor couldn't get this loss out of his head, desperately wanting to redeem himself. The plans to win the lightweight title was put on hold as his obsession with fighting Diaz again was the only thing that occupied his mind. And despite Dana White's and his team's effort to get him to rematch Diaz at 155 pounds, he wanted it on the same conditions at 170. And going into the second fight, McGregor was the underdog this time, and the vast majority of UFC fighters and experts claimed that Diaz was too much to handle and that taking the second fight was a mistake as he would lose again. This time he knew what awaited him and prepared accordingly by putting some weight on, and Conor made some adjustments as he brought in people with a similar structure to Diaz to his fight camp that could emulate him, and the preparation proved to be successful.
After 5 rounds, we go to the judges' scorecards for a decision. 48-47, McGregor. 47-47. And 48-47 for the winner by majority decision, the notorious Conor McGregor!
Surprise, surprise, motherfucker! The king is back!
Going the full 5 rounds in an absolute war, McGregor won the rematch by edging a decision, and he was back to winning ways and once again shifted his focus back to securing the lightweight title. Rafael dos Anjos, who he was supposed to fight for the title, had now lost it to Eddie Alvarez, who won their bout with an impressive performance, securing a TKO in the first round, and a new opponent had emerged. 8 months and 2 fights after he was scheduled to fight for the belt the first time, he now had a chance to win both belts and hold them simultaneously. The UFC was now a recognized and accepted sports association and had been sold for over $4 billion, much due to the success and numbers McGregor brought. He had broken every record in the game in terms of money and numbers. People who had never watched a UFC fight in their lives now watched full fight cards. Grandmothers who despised anything with fighting could describe a single-leg takedown defense in detail. The bad reputation and politics surrounding the UFC began to shift, and for the first time ever, New York City gave the green light to host a UFC card in the massive and iconic Madison Square Garden. The UFC had become a mainstream sporting event, and the first fight to headline this historic fight card was Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez for the lightweight belt. The same arena that hosted the legendary Ali vs Frazier fight in 1974, being called the fight of the century. And of course, McGregor didn't hesitate to embrace some of the vibes from that era, and he showed up to the press conference dressed eerily similar to Joe Frazier, who won that fight. Less than 3 months had passed since that 5-round war with Nate Diaz, and McGregor is gearing up to get into the octagon once again. This is the opportunity he has visualized for such a long time. Everything he has worked for has finally led up to this moment. The chance to become historic and claim the champ status for the first time ever in the biggest fighting organization on the planet.
General, for the UFC lightweight championship, I want you to protect yourself at all times, obey my commands at all times. Fight hard but fight clean. If you want to touch gloves, touch them now. Good luck.
Eddie Alvarez, Conor McGregor, champion against champion. McGregor looking to make history.
McGregor well in control. Alvarez getting loose, getting better here in this round, though.
Oh, man.
Until that.
Oh, he's done. He's done. It is all over. History has been made. Conor McGregor is the UFC lightweight champion. What a performance.
And this time his vision turns into reality as he displays one of the most dominant performances ever in the UFC, securing a knockout in the second round. Conor was pretty much untouchable during the 8 minutes they fought, securing 3 knockdowns in the process, with the third one being too much to handle. History has been written once again, and he can raise both the featherweight and lightweight belt at the same time for the first time ever, with a performance some call this era's fight of the century. He got everything he set out to get, or to quote the man himself, he went from nothing to something to everything. He has become somewhat of an icon, and his status is now greater than any MMA fighter ever. But it's right here his story takes a bit of a nasty turn. He achieved everything and did so in record time when he was only 28 years old, earning more money than any sane person could spend in a lifetime. And I think that right there is the problem. He spent his whole life perfecting the craft of unarmed combat in order to become a prize fighter, earned enough money for generations to come, and has at this stage no real excitement to fight anyone in the UFC, and begins drifting in and out of the gym. He got in, he got rich, and now he is on the verge of getting out. But then what? He doesn't need to work another day in his life if he chooses to, and he can enjoy the freedom and wealth however he pleases. There is no one he needs to answer to, and he can stay clear of any responsibilities. And I believe this is where the downfall started. However great that might seem, the goal should never be to live without responsibilities. The goal should never be to retire, but to actively do what excites you. That's what gives you a purpose. But when he achieved that in record time, that purpose was gone, and so was the excitement to wake up and train his balls off every day. Without responsibility, you have no purpose, and a man without purpose is a lost and confused man. And maybe this also explains some of his inexcusable actions that occurred during the last year or so, as money and freedom from responsibility is often a formula for disaster. However, as you know, he did make a comeback into the UFC after 2 years and a boxing bout with Mayweather, and this time he was facing the new and undefeated lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov. However, it was pretty evident from the build-up to that fight that McGregor wasn't his usual self. Something was off. That charismatic, genuine and hungry Conor was not really there anymore. The usually entertaining trash talk turned into nasty personal attacks and pure disrespect. Instead of putting all his energy into preparing for the fight, he was promoting his whiskey brand and drinking in the lead up, while his training was everything but structured, almost as if he thought he was gonna win the fight without trying his best. He unsurprisingly lost that fight, and Khabib prevailed with a brilliant performance and managed to win the fight with a vicious neck crank in the 4th round. Khabib defeated Conor at 155 pounds, and this was the first time he lost a fight in the UFC in his own weight class. Not only did this loss sting extra hard due to the rather extreme trash talking in the build-up, which Dana White and members of the media called the darkest press conference ever, but it also turned parts of his own fan base against him, and he received more hate after this fight than ever before, and it would only get worse from here. Just like the first time he lost in the UFC against Nate Diaz, he wanted the immediate rematch. However, this time the parties couldn't agree to the terms, and McGregor was refused a chance to get the immediate redemption. McGregor once again drifted off and found himself in troublesome situations more often than not. He reportedly punched a member of the Irish Mafia, which came with a $1 million bounty on his head. He was under investigation for sexual assault, and one woman claimed that she gave birth to McGregor's baby, but DNA testing proved that to be false. And let me just point out that these are all allegations and nothing has been confirmed to be true as of yet, as far as I am aware. And at this stage, no fight in the UFC excited him except the Khabib rematch, which he was denied. And so he decided to retire from the sport rather abruptly through a tweet. And a lot of people thought this was the end of Conor's professional MMA career. However, the retirement didn't seem to suit McGregor, who is used to being an extremely active fighter, and he is now strolling around in various bars in Ireland promoting his whiskey. And it seems that he can't go too long without fighting, because when an old man called his whiskey shit and refused it, Conor snapped and punched him in the head. The incident was caught on tape, and this cowardly move was released for the world to see. A few months after the loss to Khabib, he's gone completely off the rails and has now become the most hated person in the sport of MMA. The hero who took the world by storm and achieved everything he set out to do, now turned into the villain. Surely there is no coming back from this. He wasn't supposed to come back. The motivation to risk his life inside the octagon for money shouldn't exist. But he is back, and there's a noticeable difference in his attitude this time around. He's gone out publicly to address the incident at the bar, apologizing and made amends with the man privately. The dark and vicious side displayed since the build-up to the Khabib fight has submerged, and a more humble and respectful side has emerged, and people are starting to turn around on him. Conor describes it as venom leaving his body, and he's now back in the gym preparing to get ready for another fight. This time his motivation to get back into the game is no longer the same as when he started. This time his reputation and legacy is on the line, and he is in a position that he's not really used to win back the support of the people he let down. And he's off the alcohol completely for the next few months leading up to his comeback fight. There's a set structure in place, and he is working harder than ever before to get into fighting shape. He's admitting and correcting the mistakes from the previous camp, and these changes will prove to make a significant difference. A few contenders emerge as possible opponents, but in the end the UFC veteran Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone is set to face him in the octagon at 170 pounds, simply to eliminate the weight cut for both of them, as they weigh roughly the same anyway. Cerrone is a true legend and veteran of the sport, holding several records of his own, such as most wins in the UFC, most finishes and most knockdowns by kicks. And this is a fight no one can take lightly, and Conor certainly doesn't. After a visit to the doctors working for the UFC, they claimed that he is in better shape than they have ever seen him in. It's now been 15 months since he last fought in the UFC, and over 3 years since he won. More celebrities than ever show up to the fight, the arena was sold out, and almost 2 million had bought the pay-per-view, making it the second most watched event in their history, with only the fight against Khabib selling more. The whole world was eager to see if Conor was coming back for real, or if Cerrone was simply too big of a threat. And it wouldn't take long for people to find out.
All right, gentlemen, we've been over the rules. Protect yourself at all times. Follow my instructions. We're going to keep it clean. Touch gloves. Let's do it.
Favorite, former 2-division champion, the notorious Conor McGregor. Tonight's fight clock is brought to you by Modelo. Proof for those who they fight.
Conor with a big shot to start this off. Oh, Donald's nose is already bleeding.
What is that?
It might be from the shoulder. Yes.
Early head kick from McGregor. Cerrone covered. less than a minute in.
Not only was he back, but his comeback fight was one of the most destructive, one-sided performances in the UFC, and it only lasted for a total of 40 seconds. The total strikes were 27-1 in Conor's favor, and the comeback was a huge success. He didn't only win the fight, but he also won back a lot of the support from the people who doubted he would ever come back again. It was almost as if people got to see that hungry Conor again, you know, that guy that everyone thought was gone. And you can see how much it meant to him to be back with a cheering Irish crowd behind him, and it's the first thing an emotional Conor mentions in the Octagon interview. The gratefulness of the support and that they are back on top. The next thing he addresses is that he broke another record, and he is now the first person ever to secure knockout victories across 3 weight classes: 145, 155 and 170 pounds. And when money is no longer enough of a motivator, legacy and records certainly are. It seems that he is back for real, and this time his motivation is to keep breaking records and further cement his name into the history books. And maybe we can all learn something from this. No matter how dark it seems or how much venom you have inside of you, there's always a way out, and you can be the most hated person in the world. But if you're honest enough to admit and correct your mistakes, you can turn things around. And sometimes we need to change the way we motivate ourselves and evaluate what is really important to us. Implement better habits and set a structure that eliminates those mistakes. And then simply keep at it and trust the process. Love him or hate him, you have to respect him for coming back in such a spectacular fashion. And if he keeps up what he's got going on right now, 2020 should certainly be one hell of an entertaining year.
Like a savage that has $2 in the bank. I mean, he came out like he was fighting for food, like he was fighting for his family. He's back to the mindset that led him to be the most popular fighter in the world. And it's just amazing.